Okay, now let's move on to the UI and create a form that users can interact with. Create a new form and name it Documents. Make it plural because it'll show a list of documents. I've actually already created this form beforehand, so let me import it as a JSON file, and I'll show you what's there. You can get all the supplementary files like this one via the link in the description. It's called documents.json. Okay, now it's loaded, so let's click here to preview it. This form will include buttons to create, delete, and export documents, and it'll have a grid to display documents in list form. We'll be creating a responsive page, so a full-size grid version will be shown on bigger desktop screens, and a narrow grid instance will be shown on smaller displays like mobile devices or if you shrink down your browser window on a PC. Okay, let's switch back to the editing mode. The form starts with a page header that says Requests. This control will be used in action handlers, and the system will change the header dynamically. The next element is a button bar, and it contains action buttons that can be executed over the selected documents from the list. If we open the properties of each button, we'll see the actions defined for each of them. That said, it doesn't require any coding, and it can all be done in the UI here. For example, the Create button's action is to redirect us to another form which is associated with creating a document. Delete document will perform the action Grid Delete over a grid target. You can see all the controls of this form in Targets and all the predefined actions in this drop-down list. You can add your own server actions in C#, but let's leave that for another tutorial, shall we? You can see a list of your custom actions in the Code Actions menu. I won't click there now though because we haven't saved this form yet and we don't want to lose it. Okay, next, the grid element will have these columns. It'll show the status of the document approval in the system, who the author is, who the managers are, etc. Here you can specify what object will be edited through this grid. In our case, it's a document form. Also, you can select sorting and pagination type, and when we go to the Events tab, we can see that by double-clicking we'll perform a grid edit action. Last but not least, here's a form element type that matches the type on the right-hand side pane. In other words, Grid View is among the collections or element templates. Once again, this form will be mobile ready. In other words, all the form elements will display on smaller screens as well. It's an adaptive design concept where you have a duplicate element with different appearance settings. Okay, so here's a repeater element that can be used to resolve this task. In this example, we have a repeater with the name Grid Mobile. If we switch to the other tab, it says that it'll repeat our grid element, and under Style we have a checkbox set for Adaptive Layout, so it'll render on mobile devices. Accordingly, our primary grid element has this option set to Desktop. Okay, so let's X out of here and click Save up top to keep the form that we uploaded. Although we haven't technically changed anything, we imported it from the file and that counts as a change. You can learn more about creating forms at dwkit.com/documentation/forms. Okay, now let's map the data. Go to the data map up here and create a new collection here down below and select Document. And open the collection tree by clicking on the little plus button here. Okay, so we'll need to link this form with an author and manager. So let's go to Author ID and check Load for Author ID name. And perform the same operation with manager. Map the grid element with the collection below. It'll load the history of changes to it when working with the document. Okay, great. Now let's save. Okay, let's add a link field in the table and the option to change the page's header dynamically. It'll require some coding, but you can just copy and paste the code from the documentation. You can find the link to the page in the video description. Alright, so let's go to Action Handler up top and paste the code. The init function will be invoked when loading the page. The first part of the code formats the second column, which is state, and the second part adds an inbox and outbox prefix to the page header so users know what to do with the document. Alright, so let's save this code and go to the Form Builder page and click Open. Now we can see the form that we've just created. The URL will contain form, / and name of the form, which is documents. We can see it's working, but clicking Create doesn't do anything at the moment, and that's because we haven't set up a form for that yet. But we can test the responsiveness by shrinking the browser window. And it works as expected. Okay, now we'll move on and create a document editing form for the document object. Documents added in the system will appear in this grid that we've already created. Alright, so let's switch back to the Admin tab and go to Manage Forms again. Create a new form and name it Document. This time it's singular. And again, I'll just import this form that I created earlier and quickly run through what's there. The form file is document.json, and okay, it's now imported. First, let me save it right away so I don't forget to do it later. And the form will look like this. Okay, so we got a few blocks here. The info block includes a user picture, the document information, and the state of the document, which reflects where in the workflow this document currently is. The main block includes input fields. And history includes users' approval records. Similar to the previous form, Grid History and Grid History Mobile create a responsive grid for desktops and mobile devices. Let's check out the properties. On the Other tab, the property name parameter has an entity transition history value set that'll be used on the next stage. Okay, now let's go to data mapping. In the main entity, select the document model. Now we need to map the form controls and data model fields. We can use auto mapping so DWKit will map controls with similar names. It's already done most of the mapping for us, but we'll need to include author ID name because IDs are just reference attributes. This will load the actual names that'll be shown in the UI. Also, let's map the manager ID email control manually by dragging this tile from the controls list to the form attribute. For the history, we need to turn on the Entity Transition History collection. Now let's check read only because the workflow will take care of updating this element, not the form. In other words, this collection won't be saved when making changes or performing actions in the web page's UI. In this case, we won't map the control to the collection because, as you can see, Grid History and Grid History Mobile point to Entity Transition History and the property name on the Other tab. You can check out detailed information on the mapping process and the documentation via the link in the description. Okay, so let's go back to the data map and add triggers. Since documents will be numbered sequentially like 1, 2, 3, etc., we need to add a before insert trigger, select the Set Fields action, and type number, and @nextNumberID in quotes. This variable will increment number by 1. Now let's set the default fields to make it easier for users to fill out forms. We can fetch the user name, the document status, and the current date automatically. Add a new trigger, and select After New. Then pick the action, and in the parameter, we'll use this code. It'll set the author and his or her name, assign a default state, and the date. Alright, and that's all for the triggers for this form. Workflow plugin will take care of all further changes in the state and state name fields. Oh yeah, and don't forget to click Save. Now let's switch to another tab and refresh the Documents form. Now create a new record. Okay, great. It took us to the document form. Note the URL change up there. Now, if we try clicking Save, the system will show us the mandatory fields that we need to fill in. So we'll enter some details and click Save again. Keep an eye on the URL as I click Save. Now that the document is created, it's assigned with an ID that becomes a part of the URL, which goes after the form name. Let's test the display responsiveness. This is how it'll look on mobile devices. Okay, now we have both the document editing form that shows edit history and the document grid form that'll list all the documents created. Now we'll need one last form. Go here, create a new form, name it Master Detail, and import its JSON template like we did with the previous forms. Now, what we have here is a docs grid and an editing form. Save the form and go to data mapping. Add a record to the collections, select the document model, check the read-only checkbox, and map it with the docs control. It'll pull up the data from the document data model. For this to work, select Document as your main entity and click Auto Mapping. Now save and switch to the builder. From here you can open the form or type the URL. You can click on any record in the grid and see the quick editing form. Make changes and click Save. Alright, it works. The form editing and approval interface will have a sidebar in which we'll have menu items for inbox and outbox that will display the number of items in each box and the list of all documents. This form is already imported, so just go to Forms and open Sidebar. Open the settings for Sidebar_menu. And here we need to enter these menu items and paths. This root target will show the text All Requests, and then an HTML div will show the doc count. The number will be shown with a gray background, and there's a CSS class for that called UIGrayLabel. By the way, doc count is enclosed in curly brackets because it's a substitution. Learn more at dwkit.com/documentation/forms/substitution-expressions. Okay, let's add the next field. Type in the path for form/documents/inbox, and for the title type inbox, use the same div class, and use the inbox substitution here. And repeat these steps to create an outbox item. Doc count is provided by the notification plugin, and inbox and outbox are provided by the workflow plugin. Also add the master detail form and give it the title Master Detail View. The rest will stay intact, but let's add a visibility condition for the admin panel so it'll appear for admins only. Type in dwkit.api.checkrole, admins, in quotes. Everybody whose role is not an admin won't be able to access the admin's backend. Okay, that's all for creating forms, mapping them to data, and adding action handlers. This was the hardest part of the process, and now it's done. Congratulations! Now we're ready to create a workflow.